Hi, I'm Caponigro.
And I'm John Sexton.
Materials are really important. I've often used your photographs as an example of how important the silver gelatin medium is in communicating a certain quality of light. I don't think ink on paper reflects light in quite the same way. And I think it highlights how important materials can be for the final expression. I think many alternative processes or historic processes, say like early Steikens or Stieglitz's, could be better translated into a digital format without losing that particular quality. And it's not necessarily about dynamic range. We've got a fabulous black on these inkjet materials. We've got a great bright white on the surface. And yet, it's almost as if it's like the difference between looking at oil and another type of paint where oil holds and reflects light in a particular way. And some people, like you, use that material for that quality because it communicates a specific quality of light and experience that's essential to the statement. What do you think about materials, and why do you like the materials you've been using for so long? What is it that you're so passionate about?
Well, I think materials are, you're exactly right, they're extremely important. They are the vehicle that communicates anything beyond just the structure of the image. And I think that a photograph can have a tactile sensibility, and that tactile sensibility for me goes all the way down to the surface of the paper. It's, most of the time we see photographs, they're framed, they're displayed. But I really love to hold photographs and be able to, sometimes just by accident, tilt it a certain way, and there's just a glimmer, there's a sheen, there's a tooth. Each photographic paper, each inkjet paper, has its own DNA. It has its own signature. And I agree with you, they're two different experiences. They have come much closer, I think, because of advances in ink technology, advances in printer technology, and purposeful advances by the paper manufacturers to try and replicate the look of a black and white silver gelatin print. And from some distance, sometimes I think it's difficult to tell the difference.
Absolutely.
But there's still, for me, a difference. And probably I'm biased because I love the silver process itself. But I also think that, as you pointed out, you could have an oil painting, you could have an acrylic painting. They would be two different experiences. And I also agree with you that some of the inkjet prints that I've seen on matte surface papers that have a softer palette, a softer edge to them, more closely replicate, for my taste, things that might be in the vintage area of the 1930s, or certainly alternative processes like platinum and palladium. But there have been a lot of advances in recent years in terms of coming up with paper surfaces that respond well to inks with really good printers to make a good black and white print, with no apologies. But I still find it to be a different experience. And it's when you sometimes cant it over and pick up that little gloss, that little sheen that I like to look at. Each paper is different. That's sometimes where the telltale evidence occurs. And also, I think that the fact that even if we're starting with film, scanning it, and then deciding to deliver that image on inkjet in some type of a hybrid process, when we go to digital, we are in an on-off process. It's either there or it's not there. Where with an analog piece of film, a piece of conventional silver material, it probably can't be quite as sharp as some of these very high megapixel backs that are available today. But it is also, I think, better suited to create a feeling of roundness, that graduation. And it's the same thing in the darkroom when one is printing. It's not difficult to lighten or darken an area. The challenge becomes to not, A, overdo it, and also to blend from one to the other. And I think that's where a traditional piece of photographic silver gelatin paper, for me, really, it might not be as sharp, but somehow it's about the volume. It's about the three-dimensional quality. And I think if we looked at the silver gelatin process, and your father, truly a master of the medium, I mean, one of the great inspirations in my own photography, and to see how he could, to borrow terminology, I remember him using it one time, put the voice in the print. The voice. Put that message, because when the word stops, the sound still continues. There's no spectrophotometer that measures that.
No, and I think different artists use different materials because they have different voices.
Absolutely.
And different things to say.
Absolutely.
So when the materials support or even further the statement, then I think things are really working. And in the case of you and Dad, I think silver and its reflective qualities, and perhaps that continuous tone quality you're talking about, really furthers the statement. It doesn't just support it. It becomes an integral part of that statement. And so that's when I think materials really work.
Well,
I think in many cases, digital media is more flexible.
Yeah.
And yet, even though I can make an inkjet print look like a platinum or like something completely new, it's still not the same material. And so when you use silver gelatin and can specifically say what it is about that material that's unique, that can't be replicated because it's not silver and it's not gelatin, what exactly is that really helps. And it's nice to speak to people like you who are articulate. I remember speaking to some colleagues and they would often say, well, it doesn't have this je ne sais quoi. And that doesn't help anybody. But if we can angle in and get more precise on what exactly those materials do and how that contributes to the visual experience, well then I think we have a better understanding not only of materials, but also how we can achieve different effects creatively.
Yes.
Build better materials.
Well, and that's where in the digital domain I think there have been great advances in the papers, the inks, and the printers themselves.
And we've been involved in that, haven't we?
To one degree or another. You have, anyway.
No, they've been coming to talk to you about what do you think? And
yes,
what are you looking
absolutely.
for?
Yes.
Right? The manufacturers have been very good about reaching out to people who look sensitively and are able to articulate that, communicate that. And as a result, I think we have better materials because we're all contributing to the evolution of the medium.
And I think that's important. I think photographers should contribute. They should speak to the manufacturers because I think the manufacturers would like to deliver materials that we want.
Absolutely.
But sometimes we'll complain to our friends but never talk to the manufacturer. And sometimes the subtleties, in the conventional darkroom, for example, we could use a spectrophotometer today or a reflection densitometer. We can measure all the little black values. But I can take a piece of silver gelatin paper and by the right type of toning, and I like to use selenium toning, I can get a black that seems as if that black goes back further in the paper, that adds a level of dimension. Now I can measure the same black on another paper, the same density, same L star, to use the more current terminology. But it doesn't have the same experience. It doesn't have that same depth.
That's a very good point.
And I think that when a silver gelatin print works well, it has the ability, as you say, to create a metallic quality. Perhaps at a microscopic level, it has something to do with the fact that there are billions of silver grains. Who knows? But it also, I think, can produce a dimensionality that is very difficult to replicate with another medium.
Yeah.
Each medium has its own fingerprint, it has its own style, each paper. And I think today, because of there are so many rapid advances in the various technologies, from capture to output, that one thing is lost. For 13 years, I used one film, Tri-X. Since 1986, I've used two films, T-Max 100 or T-Max 400. I've experimented with other films along the way to see what's out there, but that ability to be able to work with that material on an intuitive level is very important. For many, many years, I used Oriental Seagull paper as my primary paper. I had thousands and thousands of sheets that I ran through the developer of that paper. And then for past years, I've used Polymax Fine Art, among a number of other papers, because sometimes I want a warmer paper or something like that. But I think it's hard today to have a product be around long enough to really develop that intangible relationship that becomes very important.
That's a very good statement. I'm always encouraging my students to be very broad-minded, open to a lot of different materials, and to explore them to find out what might fit their voice. But I think you're bringing up something very important here, that a sustained relationship with a particular material also adds a different kind of depth.
Yes, and that then when you go to experiment with another material, you also have a much better perspective to discover its strengths and its weaknesses, its differences, its idiosyncrasies. Because maybe a lot of the features of that different paper, be it silver or be it inkjet paper, maybe most of it isn't quite as good, but it does one thing in a very peculiar fashion. And you might not be able to pick that out unless you had a good foundation of experience. And that's one of the things that worries me a bit. It doesn't really worry me, it concerns me with others, is that things move so quickly in terms of technological advances today. You know, it's like every 18 months there's a new something, and it's always a better something. At least that's what the advertisements say, that sometimes there isn't the time to develop that relationship, because in the perfect world, the tools we're using should be used in an intuitive fashion, not an intellectual fashion, because we're not trying, I'm not trying to make photographs that are intellectually stimulated. They're something that come from within and are a personal expression of what I saw, and more importantly, what I felt.
You said something very interesting about how important it is to make a print and to hold it, and how different that experience was from looking at an image on a monitor.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that having this tangible piece of material that can be put between two fingers and changing the viewing distance, if your destination is a print, that is something I would do soon in the process. It does not need to be the same size as your final print, but we just see it differently. There's something seductive about a transilluminated image.
So you like that term transilluminated, which I think is fascinating. Again, I think we're getting back down to light and what could be more important in photography. And I like the statement that you're making, that if your final goal is a print, make a print, experience the materials early on in the process.
Absolutely. That's one of the benefits, I think, of traditional photography. If you want to see the image, in other than looking at a negative on a light table, you have to put it onto a piece of paper. And so you've already taken that first step. And early in my photography, everybody thinks they know it all at a certain point. And you know, when you're in your 20s, you pretty much know everything. And so I got pretty good at reading large format negatives on a light box. I stopped making proofs. A huge mistake for me, maybe not for others, but for me, because for reasons I can't even remember, I ended up making some contact sheets of some negatives. And one of them, I looked at it, I said, oh, this will never make a good print. As soon as I put it onto the photographic paper, it was even, I like to make my contact sheets low in contrast so I can see all the way into the shadows and into the highlights. I could see, it transported me back to the making of the photograph, this foggy day, and it was very easy to print.
So it became more tangible for you.
Absolutely, and I could live with it. I could stare at it I could pin it on the wall.
Yeah.
And then I get the opportunity to see it out of the corner of my eye, and that's where I usually can see the flaws. That's where I can see the strengths, if there are some there. And that's usually how I figure out when I have a print that I like the image, but the print isn't right. It's either in the shower or as I'm passing by. I can stare all day at it, and I do all kinds of tricks. You know, I blink at it, I just look at it, but it's got to be where my mind is not switched into the mode of trying to be a detective and figure the problem out, and then you see the answer to the problem and you know how to do it. We don't walk around our monitors.
No, we don't.
We don't.
Even though we have hundreds of them with
all
us,
over the place.
It's
but
very different than this.
When we look at the monitor, we're doing monitor business.
Yeah.
We're reading an email, as mundane as that, or we're studying very carefully all the details. We've just finished doing all the color correction. We've got all the curves in place. We're just about to take the master file and size it. And here's another thing that I think actually can work better in the digital world, but it's something I gained from a painting instructor. Not every sheet of photographic paper in the darkroom, but every time I'm printing in the darkroom, some of the sheets go up purposely upside down. It takes me one step away from what I know the photograph is is supposed to look like, and a tiny, tiny bit, a step closer to being objective. Because when it's my picture, it's not objective. And I learned that from a painting instructor. It's an old trick. Yeah. But on the monitor, for those people who are working with digital, you can make a keyboard command in Photoshop, rotate canvas 180 degrees, and boom, it's there. Yeah. You can see color balance problems, you can see corners that need to be lightened or darkened, you can see halos around areas where you've tried to blend some things together that won't show. And then also, I like to change my viewing distance, and that's good if you back away from the monitor, but the other simulation would be to, hit Command minus, make it small, 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 because sometimes you can see something in that little image that you can't see on the big 30-inch display.
It's absolutely true. And I'm smiling a little bit because I'm hearing this from a guy who uses a view camera and starts with an upside-down image.
And I hated that when I was required to use a view camera in college. I thought it was the goofiest thing in the world. And you can buy apparatus, binocular focusers that will turn it right side up for view cameras. You couldn't pay me to use one today because I love the image being upside down and backwards. Again, it takes me a small step closer to where I want that image to be, a print. And it takes me a step away from the reality of what's in front of the camera. And I remember Brett Weston saying at one point that this was probably in the mid to late 1970s, and he had been doing photography for a long time at that point. He said when he used a view camera, he saw the image right side up, and he saw it in black and white. The right side up I could actually relate to, because I remember one time when I let somebody look under my view camera, and I hadn't been doing photography so long, and they were shocked. It's one of the great joys of letting somebody look under your focusing cloth. You can just sort of time things. 5, 4, 3, 2. It's upside down. I mean, and the people they're excited. This was early on, and somebody looked at my camera that wasn't a photographer. They said it's upside down, and I had to say, "You're right. I haven't thought about that." So somewhere I had translated that, but the black and white part, I thought Brett was, just interpreting. And I can say most of the time I don't see the ground glass in black and white, but on a few occasions I have, and it's one of the most exciting things, because sometimes I'll be bundled up in that dark cloth, and then I'll decide I want to look outside the frame. And I remember not far from where you live, it was up outside of Thomaston, Maine. I was working in the forest with some ferns, vivid green ferns. I was going to take a black and white photograph, trying to get this metallic quality, and I think I might have even been fairly successful with it. But I wanted to just see if I wanted to pan a little bit to the right, so I looked outside and I was shocked they were green. I had gotten so into that image, and I think that same thing needs to happen if someone is working in digital capture and digital output. You need to be so into that space that that can happen, and I think it's hard to get into that space on a monitor on a sustained basis. So put it on a piece of paper, get some sort of fabric where you can live with the photographs. I think today we don't live long enough. We have, sustained interest level. We look at things for a few seconds on a web page. When somebody wanted to show me a portfolio a number of years ago, it meant it came in a box. They carried the box and it had prints. Yeah. And you studied them and you savored them and you enjoyed them as you would a glass of fine wine.
Well, now they're doing these speed wine tasting episodes, right?
Oh, I guess. Yeah, something. I mean, and there's something you could savor. And that, I think, is difficult to have with flat panel displays and with monitors. So if your destination is the web, if your destination is a monitor, then I don't see why you'd want to put it on paper. If your destination is a print sooner than you think you need to, print more often than you think you need to as you're going through the evolution of that image, and then when you think you've got it, obviously, keep the file pristine, keep it ready, but live with it for a while. So, it's not necessarily done. It's begun its life. And hopefully a good image can have a long life. But things age, they mature, they improve, some things get worse. And every time you go into the darkroom, you hope that you interpret a negative you printed before more effectively. And I would say that when you go back and revisit a digital file, maybe sometimes turn off some of those layers and see where it was it started. And then maybe you come up with, maybe I'll take the contrast down in this area. Maybe I'll burn that.
It's a lot of good advice in there, John.
And in search of, as your father said, the voice of the print.
Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.